Before the events unfolded, Jake Phillips lived a seemingly peaceful life in Falls Church, Virginia, alongside his wife, Catherine. Both driven and accomplished, their marriage was a blend of passion for politics and aspirations of a growing family. Catherine, working as a trusted aide to President Calvin "Cap" Pressman, thrived in the spotlight of Washington's elite, while Jake practiced law at a prestigious D.C. firm. Their lives intertwined with power and ambition, yet it was in their quiet moments of shared dreams about a family where their bond seemed strongest. Catherine's pregnancy, a long-awaited milestone after years of trying, brought hope and excitement to their lives. Their shared anticipation for the baby marked a rare break from their demanding careers, and Jake found himself filled with optimism for the future. Unbeknownst to him, however, deeper currents of betrayal and political intrigue were brewing, threatening to unravel the very fabric of his life. The early spring sky was clear, and the grounds were lush with vibrant grass, ready for the 30,000 attendees expected at the Easter egg roll. Perfect day for the event, Jake thought as he and Catherine made their way across the White House lawn. Though Jake had been nervous about Catherine being in such a large crowd while pregnant, she reassured him that everything would be fine. He kept his arm protectively around her belly, scanning the crowd for any rowdy kids. "Our little one is safe with us," he thought proudly. Suddenly, loud shouts broke out, followed by cheers as the crowd parted to reveal President Calvin "Cap" Pressman in a bunny suit, complete with oversized ears and a fluffy tail. Secret Service agents worked to control the crowd as the president waved at Jake and Catherine. "How's my favorite aide today?" he called. Catherine smiled and gave him a thumbs up as he hopped around, delighting the nearby children. Jake couldn't help but admire how effortlessly Pressman captured the crowd's attention. As Pressman moved through the crowd, Jake noticed that the photographers outnumbered the kids. Only Cap could pull this off, he thought, begrudgingly impressed. Catherine spotted some colleagues in the crowd and started toward them. But then she gasped and doubled over in pain, collapsing to the ground. Jake's heart raced as he rushed to her side. "What's happening, Catherine? Talk to me," he urged, panic rising in his voice. She couldn't respond, racked with agony. Jake looked in horror as a dark stain spread across her Easter dress. In a panic, Jake shouted, "We need help! We need a doctor!" The crowd parted and President Pressman appeared. "Get her to the helipad. Get Marine One. Take her to Johns Hopkins. Now!" he ordered. Within moments, Secret Service agents surrounded Catherine, rushing her through the crowd as Jake tried to keep up. The sprint across the South Lawn felt endless, but they reached the helicopter in less than 3 minutes. As they loaded Catherine into Marine One, Jake was pulled aboard just as the helicopter took off. He knelt beside her, holding her hand, while the whir of the engine drowned out everything else. The helicopter hovered over Johns Hopkins's Brady Building, and a team of EMTs swiftly took Catherine inside. Jake tried to follow but was left behind as the staff moved quickly. After what felt like an eternity, he was led through a maze of hallways to a waiting room. 2 hours later, a doctor appeared. "Mr. Jacob Phillips?" she called. Jake rushed over. "How is she?" he asked. Dr. Nancy Liu, Catherine's OB-GYN, led him to a private area. "Your wife is out of danger. We're keeping her overnight for observation, but you can take her home tomorrow, unless something unexpected happens." Relief flooded Jake, but his relief was short-lived. "What about the baby?" Dr. Liu's expression remained neutral. "I'm sorry, Mr. Phillips, but your wife lost her baby." Jake felt as though he'd been punched in the chest. "Why? Why did this happen?" The doctor gave him a sympathetic look. "It happens in 15 to 20% of all pregnancies, even when the woman knows she's pregnant. Many pregnancies end even before the woman realizes she was expecting. There was nothing you or Catherine could have done differently." She patted his arm gently. "This isn't the end. Many women who face it go on to have healthy pregnancies and babies. You can try again." Jake nodded, still grieving the loss, but finding some comfort in her words. "Can I see her?" "She's sleeping, but you can check on her." Jake followed the doctor to Catherine's room. He gently peered around the door and saw her sleeping, her face tired but peaceful. He approached her side, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I love you, honey. We'll get through this." Then he quietly left the room. Later, back at their home in Falls Church, Jake sat on the deck in the dark, too exhausted to eat. His grief returned, flooding him with memories now that Catherine was safe. Jake had wanted a child for years, even before Catherine did. She had insisted they focus on their careers first, but once she agreed it was time, they struggled to conceive. Doctors reassured them both were healthy, advising patience. After a long wait, Catherine finally became pregnant, but now, this tragedy. As the air grew colder, Jake reflected on how he and Catherine had met. Fresh out of law school at the University of Nebraska, Jake chose politics over law, hoping to work for a candidate who could make a difference. That candidate was Cap Pressman, an up-and-coming politician from Oklahoma. Jake admired Pressman's ability to blend populist ideals with political practicality. The fact that Pressman was young and from a neighboring state made Jake even more eager to join his campaign. At Pressman's Oklahoma City headquarters, Jake was directed to a glass-walled office where a blonde woman was on the phone. She wasn't a model, but to Jake, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. When she finished the call, she looked at him and asked sharply, "Who are you, and what do you want?" "I'm Jake Phillips," he stammered. "I'm here to volunteer." "Good," she replied, handing him a list of potential donors. "Call them and get their amounts. Don't take no for an answer." Jake took the list and made calls. Later, when the office quieted down, he found her sitting with her feet up on the desk. She looked up, annoyed. "Did you call all those donors?" she asked. "Yes, and I got some good commitments," Jake said. Her face softened. "Good job. Come back tomorrow. We've got more calls to make." Jake hesitated. "Actually, I was hoping to do something more significant for the campaign." She raised an eyebrow. "What do you think you're qualified to do?" "I'm an attorney," he said. Her eyes widened. "Why didn't you say so? We need legal counsel. Sit down and tell me about yourself." That was the start of their relationship. Catherine, who had worked with Pressman when he was a U.S. representative, soon took on a larger role in the campaign, as did Jake. Initially, she insisted on keeping things professional, which was tough for Jake. Things changed when Pressman visited Oklahoma and made a point to meet the attorney Catherine's been talking about. With his charm and persuasive personality, Pressman won Jake's loyalty. Catherine, impressed by their meeting, began warming to Jake, and they started dating. They married shortly after the national election. Pressman's primary campaign became a case study in political science. Starting with little recognition, Pressman's early disappointments in Iowa and New Hampshire were followed by a strong showing in Colorado, Minnesota, and the South. His wins in New England sealed his victory, and by the time he took California, the nomination was his. Pressman's success was partly due to his marriage to Savannah Hamilton, daughter of Senator Horatio Hamilton of Massachusetts. Their union was more a political alliance than a love match, and the senator's influence played a key role in Pressman's rise. In the general election, Pressman's opponent, a former vice president, had many connections but lacked charisma. Pressman's energy, humor, and charm won over the electorate, leading to a decisive victory. Jake and Catherine were sure they'd go to Washington to join the administration. Jake even wondered if Catherine might be offered a cabinet position, but she wanted none of that. Instead, she became one of Pressman's closest aides, thriving behind the scenes. Jake, however, chose not to join the administration. He took a job at a major law firm in D.C., joking, "One of us has to make money and live a normal life." But deep down, he had grown wary of Pressman's demand for loyalty. Though he still supported Pressman's re-election, his admiration had faded. As the temperature dropped into the 40s, Jake snapped out of his thoughts. "Spring nights in Washington can still be pretty cold," he reminded himself, heading inside. He climbed into bed, setting the alarm for an early morning trip to Hopkins. The next morning, Catherine lay awake in bed, sunlight on her face. But her expression was somber, and her eyes reflected the pain of losing the baby. Jake rushed to her side, wrapping her in a tight embrace. Her response was weak, and her lack of warmth stung, but he reminded himself that her grief was far greater than his. Trying to lift her spirits, Jake pointed to the large bouquet of flowers in the corner. "Those are beautiful. Where did they come from?" "The White House," Catherine replied softly. Jake checked the card, which was signed by the President and First Lady, wishing her a speedy recovery. When Jake called the hospital to arrange bringing Catherine home, the nurse asked him to bring a change of clothes. When he handed her the bag, Catherine requested he step outside while she changed. The request stung, but Jake said nothing as he complied. Outside the room, he ran into Catherine's OB-GYN, Dr. Liu, who reassured him, "Your wife is recovering well, but losing a baby is both emotionally and physically traumatic." Catherine's body had prepared for pregnancy, and now that's been halted. The hormonal changes will need to reverse themselves, which will be tough, especially combined with the emotional strain. Be patient and supportive over the next couple of weeks. She's going to need it. Dr. Liu paused, looking carefully at Jake. Most women readjust physically fairly quickly, but emotionally it can take longer. Time is usually the best healer, but if she struggles, we have medications that can help her through it. Your wife needs you now more than ever. Be patient and be there for her. Jake drove Catherine home, the doctor's words weighing on his mind. He vowed to do everything he could to help his wife heal. The following days were some of the hardest Jake had ever faced. Though he struggled with his own grief, his natural optimism helped him stay hopeful. He clung to the hope that he and Catherine might try again, and maybe next time they would be luckier. Catherine, on the other hand, was a different story. For the next few days, she stayed mostly in her room, only leaving when necessary, and barely spoke to Jake. After a week, she claimed to have recovered and insisted on returning to work. But emotionally, she was distant. She went through the motions of daily life, but her actions were mechanical, and she showed little emotion. She spent long periods in silence, and whenever Jake tried to comfort her, she pulled away. As Jake's own grief began to heal, his concern for Catherine deepened. The woman he had once known seemed like a stranger, detached, cold, and distant. Desperate for answers, he reached out to their friends, who all agreed that Catherine was showing signs of depression. They reassured him that patience and support were his best options. But the emotional distance continued to take its toll. 2 months later, the lack of intimacy had become even harder to bear. One night, Jake tentatively brought up the subject of resuming their intimate life. The conversation went poorly. Catherine stared at him in shock and snapped, "If I never have love with you again, I'll die a happy woman." She burst into tears, then ran to their room, slamming and locking the door behind her. Jake knew on some level that she didn't mean those words, but they still stung. Lying awake on the couch that night, he thought about their relationship. Catherine had never been very passionate, and his libido had always been stronger than hers. While he had found her lower desire disappointing, he had accepted it out of love. When they did make love, it was still an experience that left him breathless. Another realization he had about Catherine was that, in contrast to previous women he had been with, she wasn't particularly keen on foreplay. Each time he attempted to touch her there, she would softly move his hand away, saying, "You have something far more suited for that." Although he found her reaction unusual, he had no issue respecting her preferences. Jake's frustration grew as he thought more about the lack of intimacy between him and Catherine. After some consideration, he decided to take action and visit her doctor for advice. The next morning, he called Dr. Liu's office and was relieved to get an appointment later that day. When he met with Dr. Liu, he quickly outlined Catherine's symptoms. The doctor listened carefully before explaining, "It sounds like Catherine may be suffering from postpartum depression, which can happen after the incident, not just a full-term pregnancy. I'm going to prescribe Prozac. It tends to work faster for this condition than other antidepressants." As Dr. Liu wrote the prescription, Jake's grief erupted. "I don't understand how we lost the baby. We were both healthy, we ate right, Catherine avoided alcohol and medications. What went wrong?" Dr. Liu sighed sympathetically. "It's hard to say. It could have been a chromosomal issue, an immune response, or—" "Wait," Jake interrupted. "My wife never had a pregnancy termination. What are you talking about?" Dr. Liu looked at her notes and then back at him. "Yes, she did. It's right here," she said, flipping through Catherine's file. "She had a suction aspiration in February 2 years ago." Jake was stunned. "I didn't know anything about this. Let me see that." Dr. Liu quickly closed the file. "I'm sorry, but I can't share this information with you without Catherine's consent." "But I'm her husband!" Jake's anger flared. "It was my baby, too!" "I understand, but I'm bound by privacy laws," Dr. Liu replied firmly. Shocked and confused, Jake drove home, his mind racing with questions. How could Catherine have kept this from him? Why hadn't she told him about the pregnancy termination when they were trying so hard to have a baby? He wondered if things would have been different had she not gone through with it. At 8 p.m., he heard Catherine's car pull into the driveway. Stewing over the conversation with Dr. Liu, Jake confronted her the moment she walked in. "Why didn't you tell me about the pregnancy termination 2 years ago?" he demanded. Catherine's face turned red. "What? I never had a pregnancy termination. Who told you that?" she yelled. "I spoke to Dr. Liu. She told me about it." Jake stood firm. "She's lying!" Catherine shouted before storming to the bedroom and slamming the door behind her. Jake stood frozen, then heard her sobbing through the door. He sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. "What is going on?" he wondered aloud. Catherine didn't come out that night, and the door remained locked the next morning. Jake had to go to work in the same clothes, but he couldn't focus. His mind was a blur of confusion and hurt. At the end of the day, he came home uncertain of what to expect. To his surprise, Catherine was already there, acting as if nothing had happened. They had a quiet dinner, but Jake felt a knot in his stomach. Finally, he spoke. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Catherine interrupted calmly. "I didn't have a pregnancy termination, and that's the end of it." She stood up and left him sitting in stunned silence. Over the next 2 days, Jake tried bringing up the topic again, but Catherine always denied it. Frustrated, Jake decided to take a different approach. "Honey," he said one evening, "I know you've been struggling with the loss. Dr. Lou gave me a prescription that might help." He handed it to her. Catherine glanced at the prescription, then at Jake. "Thanks, Jacob, but it's not necessary. I've completely recovered." She ripped it up and tossed it in the trash before heading to the den to read. That night, as Catherine slept beside him, Jake lay awake, questioning what to do next. He felt lower than when they lost the baby. The next morning, dark circles under his eyes showed how little sleep he'd gotten. Still, he forced himself to go to work, unsure of what else to do. At lunch, Jake barely noticed the sandwich he ate at his desk. His thoughts were interrupted when his secretary told him there was a visitor from the White House. Surprised, Jake asked her to send the guest in. A woman in her 30s, fit with dark, close-cropped hair and a stylish pantsuit, walked in and introduced herself. "Hello, Mr. Phillips. I'm Helen Simmons with the U.S. Secret Service." Jake gestured for her to sit. "What can I do for you, Miss Simmons?" "I'm assigned to the First Lady," she said. "Mrs. Pressman would like to meet with you today, if possible." "Why would the First Lady want to see me?" Jake asked, puzzled. "Only she can explain that, sir," Agent Simmons replied with a smile. Jake hesitated. "When does she want to meet?" "Now, if you're available," she answered. "I've been instructed to take you to the White House." Still processing the situation, Jake agreed. He let his secretary know where he was headed. Her eyes widened at the mention of the White House, and followed Simmons to a waiting black Escalade. As they drove through D.C. traffic, Agent Simmons glanced over at him. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Phillips," she said quietly. Surprised, Jake replied, "Thank you. You know about that?" "I was on duty on Easter Monday," she said. "I was one of the agents who helped your wife to the helicopter." "Oh, I didn't realize," Jake replied awkwardly. "I wasn't really paying attention at the time anyway. Thanks for all your help." "It's my job, sir," she said, sounding professional. Then, with a softer tone, she added, "I hope to be a mom one day." "Got a husband?" Jake asked, then immediately wondered if he'd crossed a line. Simmons smiled, shaking her head. "No, still looking. I thought I found a good one. But he turned out to be a player. No worries. I'll get lucky one day." They soon turned onto East Executive Avenue and were allowed past the gates after Simmons showed her credentials. She led Jake up to the second floor of the East Wing, where Mrs. Pressman's offices were located. She knocked lightly on the door before ushering Jake in. The First Lady was sitting at her desk, writing, but stood up as he entered. "Mr. Phillips, it's a pleasure to meet you," she said, shaking his hand. "Mrs. Pressman," Jake replied with a slight bow. She smiled warmly and led him to a seating area. "We'll be more comfortable over here," she said. After they sat, her expression softened. "How is your wife, Mr. Phillips? Has she recovered from her loss?" Jake hesitated, unsure of how much to share. Finally, he replied, "She's doing as well as can be expected, ma'am. Thank you for asking." The First Lady nodded and then looked at him with more intensity. "And how about you, Jake? How are you holding up?" To his surprise, Jake felt his throat tighten. He coughed to clear it. "It hasn't been easy, ma'am. I really wanted to be a father." She reached over, patting his hand gently. Men are always expected to be strong and silent. It's easy to forget that they have feelings too. Jake nodded, grateful for her kindness, but unsure of what to say next. She gestured toward the coffee on the table. "Would you like a cup?" she asked. He accepted, relieved to have something to do with his hands. As they both sipped their coffee, Mrs. Pressman looked at him over the rim of her cup and asked, "So, what do you think of my husband?" Jake froze, unsure how to answer. After a long pause, he said cautiously, "Well, I volunteered during his first campaign for president." The First Lady's gaze sharpened. "Yes, but you didn't volunteer for his re-election campaign. You still haven't answered my question." Jake took a sip of his coffee, stalling. His mind raced. What was the right answer? Finally, he decided on honesty. "The worst that could happen is you ask me to leave." "The president has made some impressive achievements, Mrs. Pressman," Jake said. "He broke the budget deadlock in Congress when no one thought it was possible, and he handled the Southeast Asia crisis very well." Mrs. Pressman listened attentively. "But," she prompted. Jake sighed. "But lately, everything seems to be about Cap Pressman, not the country. It feels like he's acting more like a king than a president, promoting a cult of personality. There's even talk of repealing the 22nd Amendment so he can serve another term, and I've heard he's pushing it behind the scenes. That makes me uneasy." He put his cup down, bracing for her response. "Interesting," she replied. After another sip of coffee, she regarded him closely. "What are your thoughts on marriage, Jake?" Do you think it's fine for young people to live together without getting married? And for those who do marry, what about this trend of seeking relationships outside of marriage? Jake was taken aback by the sudden shift in conversation, but responded without hesitation. I'm old-fashioned, Mrs. Pressman. People who live together without marriage are afraid of commitment, and commitment is key to a strong relationship, especially if children are involved. As for affairs, I think those have-an-affair services are sleazy. She set her cup down and studied him. Have you ever been unfaithful to Catherine, Jake? The question caught him off guard. No, ma'am, I have not, and I won't. So you've never even been tempted? I can't say that, Jake admitted. But there's a difference between being tempted and acting on it. She regarded him for a moment, then stood. As Jake followed her, she extended her hand. You're a good man, Jake Phillips. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Unfortunately, I have another appointment, but I hope we can chat again. As he shook her hand, Agent Simmons appeared and began escorting him out. Before they reached the door, Mrs. Pressman stopped them. Jake, take care of yourself, okay? He smiled. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Agent Simmons led Jake to the waiting car. He stayed quiet until they hit the street, then turned to her. Were you listening to that whole conversation? She smiled. Yes, Mrs. Pressman likes to keep an ear on things. She feels safer that way. Jake was frustrated. That was the strangest conversation I've ever had. I have no idea why she wanted to see me. Helen glanced at him. In my experience, Mrs. Pressman is a sharp judge of character. She likes to form her own opinions. I don't know why she wanted to meet you, but I'd say you passed the test. Jake shook his head, still confused. Between the incident, Catherine's depression, the shocking revelation from Dr. Liu, and now a meeting with the First Lady, it felt like his life had derailed from the path he'd been on. He had no idea where he was headed. That evening, Jake told Catherine about his visit to the White House. She seemed interested in the meeting, asking about the conversation and why the First Lady had wanted to see him. But Jake had no answers, and Catherine seemed just as puzzled. Seeing her more engaged than she had been in a while, Jake cautiously brought up what had happened 2 years ago. As soon as he mentioned it, she became defensive, denying it had ever happened and falling into a mood of barely controlled anger. Seeing there was no point in pressing further, Jake retreated to the den to try to catch up on work. But with so many questions swirling in his head, he couldn't focus. He knew he had to go back to Dr. Liu, even if she wouldn't show him Catherine's file. At least he could ask for her professional opinion on Catherine's denials. The next morning, Jake went to work as usual, but after a quick check-in with his secretary, he got in his car and drove to Baltimore. Traffic was heavy, and he figured there must have been an accident when he saw a police helicopter overhead. Deciding to avoid the backup, he took side streets. When he arrived at Johns Hopkins, he went straight to Dr. Liu's office. But when he asked to see her, the receptionist looked confused. Do you have an appointment, sir? No, but my wife is a patient of Dr. Liu's. I was hoping to speak with her. The receptionist hesitated. Actually, Dr. Liu isn't here. She's on sabbatical, I think in China. We've been told to cancel all appointments and not schedule new ones until we hear from her. Jake stood there, stunned. Do you know when she'll be back? I'm not sure, sir. We don't have any details on her return. The receptionist apologized. Frustrated, Jake turned away, his mind racing. He was no closer to understanding what was going on with Catherine. And now Dr. Liu was unavailable. Jake thanked the receptionist and walked out, feeling lost. What now? He muttered, trapped in confusion and despair. It seemed like every door had closed, leaving him stuck in a haze of uncertainty and frustration. He mindlessly got on 295, heading back to Washington. Noticing a police helicopter overhead, he recalled why he'd detoured earlier, but this time the helicopter stayed above him without signs of an accident. Must be looking for someone, Jake thought, pulling into his office garage. Later that afternoon, Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from the First Lady. Urgent that we meet privately tonight. Come to Good Hope Road and 16th Street at 8 p.m. If I'm late, wait for me. SHP. What's this about? Jake wondered. Why does she want to see me again, and why the secrecy? He replied affirmatively, then called Catherine to let her know he'd be late, leaving a vague message. Afterward, he buried himself in work, drinking coffee to stay awake and avoid the gnawing hunger in his stomach. At the appointed time, Jake got in his BMW, entering the GPS coordinates for his mysterious meeting. As he drove, his mind raced, speculating about why the First Lady wanted to see him under such strange circumstances. The more he thought about it, the less sense it made. Soon he realized the GPS was taking him into Anacostia, one of Washington's roughest areas. Why would she pick a place like this? He muttered, but he followed the route until he reached the intersection. The intersection of 16th Avenue and Good Hope Road was off-center, and Jake wasn't sure which corner he was supposed to wait on. He parked on Good Hope in front of a row of dark buildings. The street was dimly lit by a few streetlights, and Jake felt vulnerable in his car. He left the engine running, locking the doors for safety. Minutes passed with no sign of anyone. A few cars drove by but didn't stop. The quiet was broken only by the distant hum of a plane. How long do I have to wait? Jake wondered, but despite the growing unease, he knew he wasn't going to leave. Soon, the coffee he'd drunk earlier made itself known. Jake squirmed in his seat, looking for a restroom, but the area seemed deserted. He reluctantly decided to wait it out, but within a minute he couldn't hold it anymore. He needed to go now or risk an embarrassing situation. Cursing under his breath, he scrambled out of the car and half bent over to an alley between two rundown buildings. As he relieved himself behind a pile of garbage bags, he muttered, "I'm as bad as a drunk." He glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Just then, a shadowy figure darted across the street and jumped into Jake's car. Before he could react, the car engine roared to life and the thief began to pull away. "Hey!" Jake yelled, quickly zipping up his pants and running after the car. But before he could reach it, someone tackled him from behind, sending him into the garbage bags. Jake struggled to get up, only to freeze when his hands accidentally touched a woman's chest. Before he could speak, a hand clamped over his mouth. "Stay down and be quiet," a voice whispered. As she let go of his mouth, Jake hissed, "My car! He's stealing my car!" "Forget the car," the woman said. But before she could explain further, a deafening roar cut her off. A streak of light shot into the driver's side of Jake's car, followed by a massive explosion. The woman threw herself on top of Jake as the blast passed through them, its heat intense. A chunk of metal flew overhead, crashing into a nearby wall. When the chaos settled, Jake struggled to lift his head. His car was reduced to a burning wreck, and a flaming tire rolled down the street. In shock, Jake barely noticed the woman who had tackled him. She moved quickly, grabbing a large piece of metal and tucking it under her arm. "Come on," she urged. "Follow me. Stay in the shadows. I don't think they can use infrared after that explosion, so we should be safe for now." "Wait, where are we going? What's happening?" Jake asked, still disoriented. "No time to explain," she said, pulling him along. "That thing is still up there, and they'll have a team on site soon to confirm the liquidate." Still in shock, Jake followed the woman down the alley until they reached U Street. She pulled him into a parked car, and after buckling him in, sped off, keeping the headlights off. Through the flickering streetlights, Jake recognized her as Helen Simmons. His shock gradually turned to anger. "What the hell just happened?" he demanded. Helen kept her eyes on the road but occasionally glanced up, trying to track the sky. "That was a Hellfire missile from a Predator drone," she said calmly. "Laser-guided, probably a 20-pound heat round. You should feel flattered. They pulled out the big tools for you." Jake's mind raced as he processed the chaos. "What about the guy who stole my car?" he asked, suddenly concerned. Helen shrugged. "One less car thief in D.C. Then, noticing the look on Jake's face, she added, "Sorry, I know this is intense. I'm just as shaken as you." Jake wasn't satisfied. "It was your boss who set me up to die tonight." Helen slammed on the brakes and yanked the car to the curb. Turning to face him, she snapped, "Mrs. Pressman had nothing to do with this. That text didn't come from her." Seeing his disbelief, she continued, "Come on, Jake. The First Lady doesn't set up meetings like that. She doesn't even send texts. Hell, I don't think she knows how." Jake lowered his gaze and Helen started the car again. But suddenly he turned to her. "Wait a minute. What were you doing in that alley? Were you following me?" Helen nodded. "Actually, I've been watching you for days. Mrs. Pressman asked me to keep an eye on you." "Really? I never saw you," Jake replied, surprised. She grinned. "I didn't want you to." Jake wasn't satisfied. "What about that helicopter I saw the other day? Was that you?" Helen's smile faded. "I wasn't the only one following you, Jake." The adrenaline started to wear off, and Jake slumped in his seat, shivering. "I don't know what's going on anymore, Helen. My life's turned upside down, and I don't know why." Helen glanced at him and squeezed his arm. "I don't know either, Jake. But I think I can take you somewhere safe, where we can figure things out." After a few more minutes, Helen turned onto Foxhall Road, just north of Georgetown. She pulled up to a 3-story mansion and identified herself at the gate. It opened silently, and they drove in. "Where are we?" Jake asked, bewildered. "This is Senator Hamilton's home," Helen replied. "He's Mrs. Pressman's father. You should be safe here. They probably think you were the one driving your car, and even if they don't, no one's going to risk calling in a drone strike on a U.S. senator." Helen led Jake inside, where a butler greeted them and escorted them to a spacious breakfast room. On the table were sandwiches and mugs of beer waiting for them. Though Jake hadn't been hungry, he realized he was famished, and they eagerly sat down to eat. Helen tried to steer the conversation away from the evening's events, but when it was clear she wouldn't talk about the attack, Jake asked her to share her story. She smiled. It's pretty simple. I grew up in Montana. My dad was a rancher. I got an ROTC scholarship at Bozeman, then enlisted and served in Afghanistan with the military police. After my service, I joined the Secret Service. They were prioritizing veterans and women, so I ended up here in D.C. Just then, Mrs. Pressman entered, and both Jake and Helen stood. The First Lady quickly walked to Jake's side and took his hands. I'm so glad you're safe, Jake. I'm devastated that my name was used to lure you into that trap, even though I had no part in it. She sat down at the table with them. I still don't understand what's going on, but it seems like you're drawing a lot of attention from several government agencies. I suspect your visit to Dr. Liu triggered something. But why would anyone care about a couple who lost their baby? Jake asked, confused. I don't know, the First Lady replied. But I think the answer lies at Johns Hopkins. There are two things you should know. First, it's one of the best hospitals in the nation, but it's also a leading research center, especially for DNA. What's not widely known is that they have DNA records for every patient treated in the last 10 years, including every baby and fetus. As Mrs. Pressman spoke, Jake's eyes widened in realization. Before he could ask anything, she continued. The second thing you may not know is that I'm a trustee at Johns Hopkins. I can get you access to information that would normally require a subpoena. Jake glanced at Helen, who looked just as surprised as he was. Please stay here tonight, the First Lady said. You'll be safe. From what I've gathered, the authorities think you were the one driving the car. It'll take them some time to figure out their mistake. Jake shuddered. Helen, Mrs. Pressman continued, I want you to take Jake to the Genetic Resources Facility at Johns Hopkins tomorrow. I've made a few calls to smooth the way. Maybe you can find out what's really going on. She smiled at them. Get some rest tonight. My father's house has plenty of rooms, so you won't be disturbed. After saying goodnight, they headed upstairs. As Jake reached for his door, he suddenly stopped. Oh my God. Helen, I'm sorry, he said, realizing something. What for? She asked, puzzled. In all the chaos, I never thanked you for saving my life, Jake said, pulling her into a hug. Helen pulled back to look at him. I was just doing my job, she said, but then a grin spread across her face. Though I did enjoy when you were groping me in the alley, she added with a playful wink and kissed him quickly on the cheek. She then turned and walked to her room, leaving Jake standing there in surprise. The next morning, Mrs. Pressman joined them for breakfast. As they ate, she shared some news. I've been checking. The Washington Post is reporting last night's incident as a gas tank explosion, she said with a dry smile. They haven't identified the driver yet, but interestingly, it seems surveillance on you has been lifted. Helen and Jake exchanged grim looks. There's more, the First Lady added. Since they don't seem to be looking for you anymore, let's keep it that way. Helen, I need you to be my aide today. I've arranged for you to be at the Genetic Resources Facility. Jake, you'll be her chauffeur. Use one of my father's cars to avoid drawing attention. After breakfast, Jake donned a dark jacket and chauffeur's cap, tipping his hat as he opened the door for Helen, who smiled at his chivalry. As they drove, Jake turned serious. I still don't get why we're going back to Hopkins, or what we're looking for. Do you know? Helen held up a large envelope. Mrs. Pressman gave me a list of information to request. Hopefully, it will help us understand what's happening. For now, let's focus on getting their help, and then we can figure out the rest. When they arrived at the Genetic Resources Corps facility, GRCF, at Johns Hopkins, the building's worn brick exterior hid the cutting-edge research inside. A researcher greeted them at the front desk and led them down a hallway. I've been told to assist you with whatever you need, he said. They reached a small waiting room outside a larger lab, where Helen explained that they needed a DNA test for Jake. Surprised, he allowed the researcher to take a sample of his hair. Before the researcher could leave, Helen handed him a second packet containing another hair sample. We need this one tested as well, and both should be compared to these two DNA samples on file, she instructed, handing him a sheet with alphanumeric codes. The researcher recognized the codes as standard identifiers for the facility's DNA records, nodded, and left. Jake turned to Helen, confused. Isn't it going to take weeks to get those samples tested? It would in a normal lab, Helen replied. But this is a state-of-the-art facility with capabilities most labs don't have. Plus, my boss is a trustee here. She thinks we'll have results in half an hour. Jake whistled in amazement. What were those codes, and where did the second hair sample come from? Helen glanced at the corner of the room. Jake followed her gaze and saw a security camera. She gave a subtle shake of her head, signaling him not to ask any more questions. Time seemed to drag for Jake and Helen, like any patient stuck in a waiting room. Finally, the researcher returned, handing an envelope to Helen. "I think you'll find everything you need in here. Please send our regards to Mrs. Pressman," he said. Helen smiled. "We're definitely satisfied, and we'll be sure to let Mrs. Pressman know how helpful you've been." They left the facility and started their drive back to the district. Jake was eager to see the contents of the envelope, but Helen told him to wait until they returned to the Hamilton estate. When they passed through the gates, they hurried into the house, where the butler led them to the sitting room. Mrs. Pressman was already there, waiting. Helen handed her the envelope, and the First Lady carefully opened it. She pulled out 2 sheets of paper, studying them thoughtfully before handing them to Jake. Jake glanced at the papers, confused. "I don't understand. What does this mean?" he asked. The First Lady pointed to one of the sheets. "This is your DNA, Jake," she explained gently. "The alphanumeric code below it is for the DNA of the fetus your wife aborted 2 years ago. The analysis confirms you were the father." Jake exhaled deeply, relief flooding him for a moment. "I was afraid. I thought it might not have been my baby," he murmured. But as the weight of the revelation sank in, anger replaced the relief. "But she aborted my baby? Why would she do that? We both wanted a child." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he angrily wiped them away. He turned to look at Helen and Mrs. Pressman, who were sitting quietly, their expressions somber. He pointed to the second sheet. "What does this one say?" he demanded. "The code is for the fetus Catherine lost at the Easter egg roll," Mrs. Pressman explained. "It confirms you're not the father, but it does identify another man." Jake's confusion turned to rage. "Who is Subject B? Where did that sample come from?" Mrs. Pressman lowered her gaze, troubled. "I'm afraid it's my fault," she admitted quietly. "I took the sample from my husband's hairbrush." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "My wife is having an affair with the president? She was carrying his baby?" The shock hit him like a physical blow. He sank onto the sofa, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the truth. The tears came freely now, as the emotional strain of the past weeks broke him. Helen sat beside him, holding his hand, while Mrs. Pressman slid over and handed him tissues. After a while, Jake regained his composure and looked up at them with new resolve. Helen noticed the change and asked carefully, "What are you planning to do now, Jake?" "I'm going home to confront Catherine," he replied, his voice firm. Helen exchanged a worried glance with Mrs. Pressman. "Jake, I think you should stay here," the First Lady urged. "It's not safe for you to go out yet. I wouldn't want another accident, if you know what I mean." Jake hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but I'm calling her. I can't keep this in any longer." The 2 women exchanged a brief look. Helen reached into her bag and handed Jake a phone. "Use this," she said. "It's a burner phone, never been used. It won't trigger any alarms." Jake took the phone and stepped out onto the patio. He dialed Catherine's number, and after several rings, she answered. "Yes. Who is this?" she asked cautiously. "It's me, Jake, the husband you thought was dead." "Jake!" she exclaimed. "I've been so worried about you. Where have you been? I tried calling you, but all I got was voicemail. Stop!" Jake cut her off. "I don't want to do the loving couple act anymore. I know about you and your lover. I know whose baby it was that you lost, and I know it was my baby you aborted 2 years ago." "Jake, please, I don't want to hear your lies," he interrupted, his voice rising. "No excuses, no apologies. Just know that as soon as I can, I'll be filing for divorce. And I'm not filing for irreconcilable differences," he added bitterly. "It'll be adultery." "Jake, wait," Catherine pleaded. "We need to talk, please." "Why? So you can have another drone try to liquidate me?" he snapped. "What are you talking about? I don't know anything about drones," she protested, but Jake was beyond listening. "Fine, have it your way," he said coldly. "But either way, I want you out of my life. As fast as I can make it happen." "Just wait until tomorrow," she begged. "Please don't." "As far as I'm concerned, you're not my wife anymore," Jake said, his voice sharp. "You don't get to ask me for anything, now or ever again." He ended the call, wishing he could slam the phone down. When he returned inside, Helen was waiting. "How did it go?" she asked softly. Jake let out a heavy breath. "About as well as you'd expect. All denial and delays." "I didn't know. We need to talk. Don't be hasty." Seeing the emotions flicker across Jake's face, Helen gently guided him into the den. "Let's take a break from all this for a bit," she said. "There's a ball game on TV. We can watch the Nationals play, see how bad they are this season. I'll make us some sandwiches, and I think there's some imported beer in the fridge. Come on." Jake hesitated, but let her take charge. To his surprise, after a while, he found himself relaxing. They joked about the game and criticized instant replay. For the most part, he managed to push his emotions aside, though the commercials for happy families stung. Helen wisely steered him back to lighter topics whenever she could. Later, Helen walked Jake back to his room and hugged him at the door. "It'll get better, Jake. You've taken the first step by uncovering the truth. At least now you know what you're dealing with." "I hope you're right, Helen. It's just all so overwhelming," he replied. She watched sympathetically as he closed the door, knowing he wouldn't be sleeping anytime soon. The next morning, as they had breakfast, the butler arrived. "A gentleman from the FBI is here to see Mr. Phillips," he said. "What should I tell him?" Jake and Helen exchanged looks. He nodded, his expression determined. "I'll be right there." Helen quickly strapped on her holster and followed Jake to the door, positioning herself so her tool was visible. The FBI agent was waiting at the door, holding up his credentials. "Mr. Jacob Phillips?" Jake acknowledged him, and the agent continued. "The president would like to see you at the White House. I've been instructed to drive you there." Jake looked at Helen, who mouthed something to him. "I'll go, but I'll use my own transportation," he said. The agent shrugged. "Suit yourself, sir," he replied, and left. Jake and Helen quickly prepared and drove toward the White House. "I don't think they'll try anything now," she said. "But I'm taking the most public route. Better safe than sorry." "I wonder how they found out where I was," Jake asked. "They must have really ramped up the search after your call to Catherine last night," Helen guessed. At the White House, the agent greeted them again. Helen squeezed Jake's hand. "Good luck," she said before he walked up the steps. The agent led Jake through the hallways and into a small office with a table and a metal detector. "Your cell phone, please," the agent said. Jake handed it over reluctantly, hoping to record the meeting with the president. "Are you wearing a wire? Any electronics?" the agent asked. Jake shook his head. "Do you have a pacemaker?" "No," Jake replied, confused. "What's all this about?" The agent grinned and pointed to the device by the table. "If you're carrying any electronics, this will fry them, and probably you too." Jake walked through the detector nervously but without incident. The agent then led him to the Oval Office. "Take a seat. The president will be with you shortly." Jake sat down in front of the desk, taking in the room. Even though Catherine had worked in the White House for years, he'd never been here. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the power in the room. The door opened behind him, and he turned to see President Calvin Pressman walking toward him. Despite his hatred for the man, Jake rose instinctively in respect for the office he held. Pressman didn't offer his hand or speak. He simply motioned for Jake to follow him. They passed through a door Jake hadn't noticed, walked through a vestibule, and stepped out onto the White House lawn. "This is a better place for us to talk," the president said. But before Jake could respond, Pressman raised his hand for silence. He spoke into the open air. "Do not record. This conversation is privileged, personal, and confidential." Jake glanced around but saw no sign of recording equipment. The president began walking, and Jake quickly followed. "I prefer this side," Pressman said, glancing around. "Everyone talks about the Rose Garden, but I think the Kennedy Garden looks better this time of year." Jake shot him a look. "I don't think you brought me here to discuss flowers, Mr. President." Pressman smirked. "No beating around the bush, huh, Jake? You're right. I brought you here to talk about Catherine." Anger flared in Jake. "I know all about you and Catherine," he said, his voice sharp. "You don't know a damn thing," Pressman snapped. But Jake didn't back down. "I know you tried to have me killed with a drone strike to take her for yourself," Jake retorted. The president's anger faltered, replaced by a hint of embarrassment. "I'm sorry about that, Jake. It was a mistake. I got angry and said things I shouldn't have. They took me too seriously." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh, like Henry II and Thomas à Becket?" Seeing the president's confusion, Jake added, "When the king asked his men, 'Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?'" Pressman waved it off. "Whatever. Anyway, the reason I brought you here is to talk about my legacy. I've accomplished nearly everything I set out to do, but there's one thing missing, an heir. My wife is sterile, which is why I need Catherine." Jake frowned. "If you weren't happy with your wife, why not divorce her?" Pressman gave him a patronizing look. "Divorce? Do you know how many votes her father controls in the Senate? Without his support, I couldn't get anything done. Hell, I wouldn't have even gotten the nomination without him." Jake's initial contempt gave way to something darker. "Wait, the nomination? You and Catherine were involved back then? How long has this been going on?" Pressman grinned, satisfied. "We fell in love during my first run for the nomination, before you even met her. We did a damn good job keeping it secret, too." Jake was stunned. "But why marry me if you two were already in love?" Pressman smirked. You were the perfect cover. She could work with me closely, and with you in the picture, no one suspected anything." Jake was shaking his head. "But your wife, the Secret Service, the media, how did you two manage to meet?" Pressman winked. "There are ways. Places without surveillance, trips overseas, even on Air Force One. It wasn't frequent, but we made it work." His face grew serious. "You pushed Catherine to start a family, and she finally agreed to stop using birth control to please you. What you didn't know is she used a diaphragm with you. It's 94% effective, and it must have worked. Except 2 years ago, you guys ended up in the 6%. When she got pregnant, we knew it wasn't mine. So we arranged for the pregnancy termination you found out about." Jake was floored. "But she got pregnant last winter. How does that fit?" Pressman almost laughed. "I said she used a diaphragm with you, not with me. After the pregnancy termination, we decided we couldn't risk another mistake, so we moved up the timetable. She got her pregnant, and you'd think the baby was yours. Our plan was foolproof, except for that." Jake stood speechless. His whole marriage had been a lie, and the woman he thought loved him had deceived him for years. Pressman started walking again, and Jake followed in a daze. "That's all in the past. I want to talk about the future. No more talk of divorce. You and Catherine will stay married. She'll get pregnant again, and you'll be the proud father." He chuckled. "I'll get her pregnant. My doctors say I have the balls of a man half my age." Jake could barely process it. "You're going to raise the child for 2 years. Then after my second term, I'll divorce Savannah quietly. You and Catherine will split. She'll get full custody, and eventually, Catherine and I will marry. I'll adopt the child, and it'll become Pressman." Jake stared at the president, struggling to keep his composure. "You really think I'd go along with this insane plan? Why shouldn't I walk out of here and go straight to the Washington Post?" he demanded. The president looked at Jake carefully. "Over the years, I've learned it's best to use both rewards and threats to get things done. So, Jake, would you consider my offer if I could give you your biggest dream? Better yet, what if I could offer you the dream of every attorney in the country, along with lifelong financial security?" Jake was confused, staring at Pressman in disbelief. The president kept going, pointing toward the Department of Justice. "Look over there. How would you like to see your portrait hanging in the Justice Department? The current Attorney General is retiring soon. How about you take the job? For 2 years, you'd be the country's top legal advisor. Afterward, any law firm would offer you a huge salary, or you could become the dean of any law school you wanted. You'd have it all. Just keep things as they are for 2 more years." Before Jake could respond, someone waved from the White House and Pressman turned back. "I have to go. I've kept the French ambassador waiting. It'd be easier if I were president of France. They're much more lenient about affairs of the heart. Anyway, think about it. You'd be foolish to pass this up." With that, Pressman walked away, leaving Jake in the Kennedy garden. Soon, the FBI agent appeared, returning Jake's cell phone and escorting him back to Helen, who was waiting in the car. As they drove off, Helen asked eagerly, "So, what did he want?" Jake stared out the window, lost in thought. "I've got a lot to think about," he said quietly. 3 months later, the reporter stood on the steps of the Senate building listening to her earpiece. As the producer cued her, she turned to the camera. "This is CNN live from Capitol Hill, where Jacob Phillips' confirmation hearings for Attorney General will begin shortly. Phillips, if confirmed, will be the youngest Attorney General in U.S. history. But with President Pressman's backing, these hearings are expected to be a formality." She adjusted her earpiece. "The hearings are starting, so let's go live to the Senate caucus room." Inside the room, Jake sat before the panel of senators, glancing over at Catherine, who smiled and gave him a thumbs up, her pregnancy starting to show. Senator Horatio Hamilton, the committee chair, called the session to order and nodded at Jake. Jake stood and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here as the nominee for Attorney General. Every attorney dreams of this post, and I'm no exception." He paused. "The purpose of this hearing is to discuss my legal philosophy and influences. One influence I'd like to mention is T.S. Eliot, particularly his play Murder in the Cathedral." There was a murmur in the room, but Jake pressed on. "The play tells the story of Archbishop Thomas à Becket's murder by King Henry II's agents. The focus, though, isn't the crime, it's temptation. Becket had choices: fame, power, safety. But he rejected them, saying the greatest treason is doing the right thing for the wrong reasons." Jake looked directly at the committee. "I believe Becket was right. It's wrong to do the right thing for the wrong reason. And for that reason, I must renounce my nomination. This post wasn't about my ability, but a calculated bribe I cannot accept." Shouts erupted from the room, and photographers scrambled for shots. Senator Hamilton quickly restored order, signaling Jake to continue. You may wonder why I waited so long to reject this nomination and why I'm doing it here, in such a public forum. The answer is simple. I want to make sure my words can't be suppressed or explained away. Jake took a deep breath. I'm here today to charge President Calvin Arthur Pressman with high crimes and misdemeanors. The Senate caucus room erupted in shock as Jake's words hit the room. Shouts from reporters and senators followed, but the chairman quickly restored order. With a signal, he muted the microphones and calmly gestured for Jake to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, here are my charges. The president authorized a military drone strike against me, a U.S. citizen, on U.S. soil. If not for outside intervention, the attempt would have succeeded. The president has been involved in an ongoing affair with my wife, Catherine, trying to father an heir. When I got too close to the truth, he tried to have me liquidated. After failing that, he offered me the position of Attorney General to buy my silence. Regardless of what this Congress decides, I will be filing for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, and I will name the president as co-respondent. Jake paused, the weight of his words sinking in. I know these are serious accusations, so I will now provide evidence. Over the past 3 months, we've gathered undeniable proof. First, DNA evidence of the president's relationship with my wife. Second, evidence of the drone attack on me, including a photograph of the Hellfire missile's tail fin that was fired at me. The serial number and markings identify its source. Helen, please distribute the evidence to the committee and the press. Helen Simmons nodded, distributing the envelopes as reporters and senators scrambled for copies. Jake glanced at Catherine, who was swarmed by reporters, then at Senator Hamilton. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks. The chairman nodded and turned his gaze toward the gallery. Jake followed his look to see the First Lady standing at the entrance, arms crossed, nodding grimly before retreating. 1 year later, Jake finished filling the tank and walked into the gas station to pay. He had been using cash to stay off the grid as much as possible. Though he knew they could still track him, he didn't want to make it easier. He hadn't checked the news in days, but when he saw a copy of USA Today on the counter, he picked it up. The front page featured a grim-faced President Pressman being escorted by federal marshals. The headline read, Pressman heads to the pen, with the subheading, First President ever convicted of a felony in office. Jake chuckled. He always wanted to make history. Looks like he got his wish. He left the station, glancing at the clear blue sky. He spotted an airliner far overhead, but nothing else of note. Quickly, he stepped under the roof of the gas pumps to shield himself. Back at the car, he passed Helen an ice-cold soda. Thanks, she said and asked, How long before we hit Nebraska? Jake looked at the endless prairie ahead. About an hour. We'll reach the Missouri River soon. As he started the car, Helen squeezed his arm, concern in her eyes. Any second thoughts about coming back here? Pressman still has allies in Oklahoma? Jake smiled. I'm not worried. Cornhuskers and Sooners have been rivals forever. He grew serious. Do you know Nebraska's state motto? Helen shook her head. It's equality before the law. Nebraskans don't take kindly to anyone thinking they're above the law, whether it's here or in Washington. Still, I worry about you, she said. Jake reached over and squeezed her hand. I'll be fine as long as I've got you watching my back.